This episode of the Zero Cafe podcast is made possible by our partners Online Influence Institute and VWO. Today I talk with Erwin Kerk, senior consultant at SiteSpect for over 11 years now, and we're going to talk about browsers, cookies, and CRO. In case you missed the previous episodes, we spoke with Abby Schoenberg, the director of marketing at Fancy.com, about how UX and CRO are handled at the social e-commerce marketplace Fancy.com. And you can listen to that episode on www.zero.cafe or in the podcast app you're listening with right now. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 6. Welcome to the Zero Cafe podcast. And first off, of course, we would love to know a bit more about you, your work at SiteSpect, and let's start off with what SiteSpect actually does.
So thanks for having me. My name is Erwin Kerk. I'm a senior consultant for SiteSpect, and at SiteSpect we provide an experimentation platform which is rather unique in its implementation. So most tools that you will know will use some kind of JavaScript tag or script. But in SiteSpect, we try to stay away from that and have a completely different delivery mechanism. So that means that we position ourselves between the browser and your visitor and the actual web server, which means that everything that the browser does is, intercepted might not be the best word, especially not if I'm talking to a security guy, but we can see everything that the user is sending, every request, and everything that the web server is returning. So the full web page or a JavaScript or CSS, we can change that on the fly without the user actually seeing that change. So our benefit is that we have a smarter delivery mechanism and that we can do it without any risk of a flicker effect in the experiment on the browser.
And you've already been working for the company for over 11 years, right?
Yeah, almost 11 years now. So I'm in March, I will be hitting my 11-year mark. And that indicates that I have basically the best job ever. So it's the most diverse I've ever had so far. I've never stayed that long with a company. Also not planning to leave anytime soon. So, and that's a combination of having really cool clients to work for. So it's the bigger names, enterprise customers, some smaller, some bigger, and with various degrees of maturity. So we can have a company that we only need to support on the technical level, but we also have companies where we actually work with them to create their experimentation program. Yeah. And that together with a really cool team. So we're a relative small team here in Europe, but it's a very agile and very effective team. So there's a lot of general knowledge and some specialties for each of the team members.
Yeah. So where's SiteSpect based and how is it dispersed over the world? How does that work?
So SiteSpect originally is a US company founded in 2004 in Boston. So probably at some point someone woke up with a great idea that evolved into what SiteSpect is today. And we have a team in Boston, US, of course. That's the biggest team, all working from home right now, as you can imagine. And we have a team in the UK supporting their UK customers. And we have a team here in the Netherlands for mainland Europe, basically.
Okay. And you already mentioned SiteSpect is set up a bit differently. Usually how these A/B testing tools work is they basically change the things inside the browser. So first, all the content is delivered to the user, and then on site on their phone, on their laptop, that's where the changes take place. You take a different approach. Things are changed on the server side. You're in between that user and the server where the website resides. So how does that compare? I mean, I can imagine that both take time. I mean, something takes time when it needs to be changed on the browser side, but things also take time if there's a server in between that needs to change things for the user. So how do these compare?
That's absolutely true. So you can't do anything without it taking some time, of course. But I think the difference here is that with a script-based solution, usually you need to load a tag and you are first delivering the original page. So you're already spending time and resources on delivering the original page to the customer. And then after that, you're going to load the variant on top of that. So you're adding additional time needed for making the change. While with SiteSpect, for example, we basically strip out the full original version and replace it on the fly. So the payload doesn't get any bigger. In addition to that, while tag-based tools usually need to wait until the page has been rendered in some form that they can change, we can already start making those changes on the fly while the page is being served. So we don't need to wait for the full page to be ready. When we see a certain markup coming by through SiteSpect, we can already start changing that and giving the browser a head start for rendering.
Yeah, it depends a bit on how those tech-based solutions work in the way they do this. But however they work, they'll require sometimes some resources of that phone or laptop.
Absolutely,
I can imagine, especially on phones, it can be quite resource intensive relative to the device to actually perform those calculations and do those changes, right?
Absolutely, and especially if you're looking at the more complex scenarios that you're testing a lot of look and feel changes. We see a lot that customers that switch to SiteSpect used to use a tag-based tool and then had a big reliance on development teams to make that change in the backend. So that means that they can't benefit of the fast-paced experimentation program that we'd like to have, but still need to rely on developers for those more advanced changes, because otherwise they might be loading the browser up with too many scripts, too many code actually in that smaller device. And luckily, most phones, especially in Europe, are fast and pretty good. So, but if you're a company with a global presence, for example, you need to account for also situations where the phone might not be that fast, or the internet connection might not be that fast. So it's something that you need to keep in mind as well.
About 10 years ago, some browsers had some extensions blocking scripts. Minority of users were using those, but browsers are catching on, blocking cookies, blocking scripts themselves. The worst offenders in this case, if you would say worst offenders, they're doing it for privacy reasons. But I think Brave and Safari are the ones that are doing this the most. Chrome is the most lenient one. I guess Google has a stake in people using scripts, I guess, somehow.
And being able to serve ads and that kind of everything stuff. Cookie related.
Exactly. But can you give us a short TLDR of what is happening? I mean, most people listening to this podcast will have some idea of what's coming. But can you give us a short state of affairs of what's happening right now?
Yeah, so basically a long time ago when the internet was invented, it was stateless. And at some point, someone discovered that cookies, mechanism of cookies where you send small pieces of information back and forth between the browser and the web server, made things a lot easier for a lot of scenarios. One of the more common scenarios is like being able to log into a website. Very useful, very benign, also a good thing to do. But more and more, these cookies also got used by third-party advertising agencies or tracking or personalization tools. So there's a less beneficial side effect for the user there as well of those cookies. So what browsers starting to do is see how they can make the internet still usable for the users, but by blocking more and more cookies. But not only cookies. It's called script writable storage. That would include not only the cookies, but also local storage or session storage. And they're trying to make the user more protected, I guess, from these third parties or advertising cookies. And in a rather aggressive way sometimes. So it could be that if you're looking at one single user getting a couple of cookies, but within 24 hours, those cookies could disappear if the user doesn't visit the site often enough. And that means that from a publisher's perspective, you lose a lot of capacity to identify or recognize those users, which is helpful when you want to target things or make sure that the experience is tailored towards a user. And that means that a single user that comes to the website like today and maybe somewhere end of next week as well is identified as two individuals by your system, while in reality it's the same user. From a user perspective, you could say that that's not a bad thing. So the publisher doesn't need to know who I am, but it would also mean that, for example, any advertising you get will be less targeted and could be more intrusive or annoying as well.
Yeah, same with personalization, right? I mean, it's not all bad. It can be.
No, it's definitely not all bad.
It can be very helpful if you can just show me the things that I based on the things that I bought before or the things I'm interested in, and serve me things. Well, I think an obvious example that many people will recognize is when you go to YouTube, they serve you videos based on your interest. Of course, if you go to the extreme, you can also say this is creating a filter bubble.
It is.
That also has negative effect. But if you have some nice balance between showing new things and showing things based on what you like, that's obviously they're doing that because it increases engagement with the website, and you do that because it's useful for you or interesting to you.
So, and I guess that balance shifts back and forth during this cat and mouse game between browsers and third-party advertising, for example, because they try the browsers try to protect the end user and start blocking certain technologies in the browser. Like first they started with blocking cookies, then the advertising parties started to respond like, okay, let's use session storage or local storage in the browser. So now most browsers are also having some effects on that as well and start blocking that as well. So it will be a cat and mouse game. So before we find that balance, it will. My expectation is that it will take a few more years before we find some kind of balance here. But it also means that slowly the benefits of cookies will be limited to hopefully only the benign cases, the good things that can come out of it. And that and I'm saying that from a customer's perspective, so the consumer's perspective. But from looking at what my customers want to do, they want to be able to identify users to learn as much as they can from them.
Yeah,
that's I guess the tension between the two sides of it. For depending on your perspective, it's either good or bad.
Yesterday's brainstorm was so good. I really liked Steph's idea of running that test on the call to action buttons. Making them orange will really make them stand out, don't you think?
Yeah, right. Do you want to design real A/B test winners and achieve enormous conversion uplift? Then stop brainstorming and take a scientific approach. If you can read Dutch, follow the steps in Online Invloed, the bestseller on managementbook.nl. Or enroll in the author's course and become an expert in applying proven behavioral science yourself. Go to onlineinfluence.com for more information and free downloads. So how does SiteSpect help in this? How is SiteSpect, the way that SiteSpect works, we just explained that it's a bit differently than many other optimization tools. How does that help in this case?
Yeah, so some scenarios with ITP and ETP are safe. So it's mostly targeted at script writable storage. And one of the things I just explained is that SiteSpect doesn't rely on any script. So we work from, if you look at it from a browser's perspective, SiteSpect is server side. But if you look at it from a server's perspective, SiteSpect seems to be client side. Actually, we're right in the middle. So again, it's depending on your perspective. But the SiteSpect cookies are, first of all, not third-party because SiteSpect is installed on a customer's domain. So if we're looking at example.com, then it's not that our SiteSpect code is coming from a separate domain like example.sitespect.com or sitespect.example.com. So we are part of the same domain, which makes us first-party, which is the first benefit. Second benefit is that our cookies are sent from the server, from the browser's perspective. That means that our cookies are considered safe. Our cookies are considered non-intrusive. And we also mark our cookies as what they call HTTP only cookies. So that means that in the browser, you can't even read or access them.
Yeah.
So in that way, SiteSpect is, well, safe until they decide to completely kill the cookies, which at some point in future most likely will happen. But once we get there we need to rely on different mechanisms that at that point hopefully have evolved into something really useful.
Yeah. So how does that work regulation-wise? Because if you just if the regulator says, okay, you cannot use these kind of technologies to track users, like or the browsers do, it doesn't really matter in this case if it's browsers have such such power. Either regulator or browser says, okay, we cannot use third-party cookies anymore. If those regulations are based on specific technology that you cannot use, people will find a way. Last week I read a way people could use the FAF icon as a way to track users and use that. So there will always be a way. But if the regulator says okay, you cannot personalize something without someone knowing, so someone has to give consent to personalization, for example. then the technology doesn't matter anymore. So then still SiteSpect needs to comply with that, right? So in that sense,
that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
So consent is, I guess, the key word in a lot of these discussions, because a lot of the tools are now basically blocked. So browsers are blocking things, but what, in my opinion, they should do is tell the user what's happening and give the user an option.
Yeah.
Well, we all know what happens if you just present a little dialogue at every website and every visit. A user will just happily click on the biggest button they can find. And it's still not an informed consent. But there's a lot of things going on, especially here in Europe. We see a lot of legislation being passed for, okay, we can't track the user without them knowing, or we can't save cookies without them knowing. And depending on how you explain those laws, you might have some little holes that you can use. But SiteSpect can, of course, just follow that rule. So if one of our customers decides to put on a cookie compliancy filter in front of the website, then they can ask us to basically follow that compliancy. And that means that a user that has not given consent cannot be tested with SiteSpect, which is, of course, a bummer. We'd love to test that user.
Yeah.
Fun fact, it's very different across our customers. Some customers consider SiteSpect as an analytical tool, and basically make us follow the compliance. Mm-hmm. But there's also companies that actually find this a more functional cookie or a required cookie, because they use this to make their tool better in somehow.
Yeah.
So it's not that it's always behind the compliancy filter, but sometimes it's also, we'll just test the user.
Yeah. Do you see big differences in that sense I guess you mainly work for European clients, but when you talk with your colleagues at SiteSpect, are there big differences between why people then start using SiteSpect across the world?
The reasons for companies using SiteSpect are varying between the feature set that they might get. And hopefully, of course, I believe SiteSpect is having a good feature set, but depending on your scenario, that might be true or not. We also see a lot of data privacy as being one of the main reasons. And that has to do with the fact that we can also be implemented not externally, like in a CDN, but we can also provide physical hardware for your data center. So if you are a bank or a financial institution, or for example, you work in Germany where they have this Datenschutz law, which is extremely strict. And the German companies also make it a sport into following that to the letter. Then they might consider SiteSpect because we can have the complete tool in their data center where no data is leaving their secured environment. It could also mean we have several customers where we can't actually access our own SiteSpect servers without their permission and without a 4i principle.
And this sounds like a really enterprise end solution. Does it mean it's also really expensive to run SiteSpect? I mean, if you need to get your own server for that and put that in between the user and your own servers where your website is running, does it make SiteSpect really expensive compared to the other ones, or how does that work?
No, not at all. I think the return on investment in SiteSpect is equally as good or even better than other tools. I think price-based, we're somewhere between the main players and even the cheaper ones. But it also, of course, depends on how you plan to use the tool. So you can get a cheap tool and spend a lot of money on your internal resources, like the people working on it. Or you can do it the other way around, get a really expensive tool, but only have a single person working with it. But I think you need to find the balance here. And what we get so far with the discussions we have with our customers and potential customers is that our price is basically pretty average. But for that pretty average price, you also get a really good team that supports you. And I guess that's the benefit. But sorry, I promised my colleagues to give them a little bit of praise here.
So besides the whole everything that relates to this being a server-side tool versus client-side tool, what are the other features that set SiteSpect apart?
So I guess the main feature, of course, is the uniqueness of our implementation that brings a lot of.
What does that allow me to do as a CRO
Exactly.
specialist? What does that allow me to do what other tools don't allow me
So
to?
basically, we have 5-6 ways of making changes with this tool. So while tech-based tools always rely on JavaScript code to execute the changes, we can leverage quite a few things. The basic version, well, it's not like we have different versions, but the basic approach would be search and replace. So everybody knows how to do search and replace, especially at the beginning of the year. You take all your old documents, change the year of 2020 and change it into 2021. That is basically what SiteSpect can do as well, but we do it on the fly. So while a page passes, so you're looking up your website, your travel website, and it has a certain phrase of text or a certain piece of markup in the original source code, then SiteSpect can look for that and replace it with something else. That means that the original is gone, the replacement's in there, and the browser doesn't know about it. It will just render whatever we feed it. So, and that is more powerful than just being able to do it with JavaScript, because we can also change things that are not necessarily accessible through JavaScript. So we can, for example, change a data layer, or we can change the complete markup of the full page. We can replace it with a completely different page. On the other hand, that's waiting for the response for a web server. And then we'll change the things on the fly and swap out images, change CSS, whatever you want to do. We can also leverage the benefit of most customers having a pretty flexible CMS. So if you can copy a page in the CMS to a new URL and then make your changes there. For a lot of users, they don't want to work a lot in a tool like that. In SiteSpect, for example, you can do a lot, but maybe they're more comfortable with the CMS system. So let's just copy a page, give it a new URL, make all the changes. And then in SiteSpect, we can set up a redirection experiment with either a real redirect, which any tool can do. You see the URL shifting, and then we load the original and immediately go to the next page. But in SiteSpect, we can also make that invisible. That means that while the user is requesting the original URL, let's call it original.html, we're actually fetching variant.html from a web server without the user ever seeing that URL.
Yeah, nice.
Furthermore, we have what we call origin experiments, and that might look a little bit like the server-side solutions that all the vendors have. But in our case, when the request from the browser goes through SiteSpect to the web server, we add information in that request. And that information could indicate to a web developer like, okay, I need to do something different. A good example would be shipping costs. It's easy to pull them off the front end of the website, hide them or change them. But once the order gets into the fulfillment system, that is creating an invoice, and still the actual shipping cost will be on there. So that's a suboptimal experience to the end user. So what we can do is send instructions to that backend. For this specific visitor, we've exposed them to a variation that says no shipping cost, so please do not calculate the shipping cost. Slight reliance on a developer, of course, but it could all be prepared well in advance. And even we have customers that actually incorporate that into their whole development process, that every new feature that gets developed is somehow switchable, like feature flagging. And then with SiteSpect, we send that switch and test what they're doing and see what the effects are on the bottom line.
Will this work? Maybe not. Isn't that what we're all trying to figure out? With VWO, create and A/B test different variations of your website to continuously discover the best performing versions that improve conversions. Stop guessing. Start A/B testing with VWO today.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, then that's very useful. Those are things that client-side tools cannot do. You can change everything that's in the HTML or CSS output, but whatever happens in the backend still happens in the backend.
Exactly. And besides that, with most tools, you can basically work on whatever is on your screen. So the HTML and the result of the HTML, the JavaScript and CSS basically. But in SiteSpect, since every request is going through that SiteSpect layer, we can also work on API requests. We can work on JSON feeds that are coming in. We can work on CSS files directly or JavaScript files directly. And more, of course, we see single page applications, which rely heavily on JavaScript. And with single page applications, there's of course the challenge that not everything you see on screen has been generated as is by the server. So some things will happen in the browser.
So hypothetical example, if I have a website selling food or drinks, and I want to experiment on the listing page, on the category page, showing those products, but hey, I would like to, based on user research, of course. I see that users are already interested in, hey, what would be the ingredients in these products? They were already interested in that on the listing page. But yeah, if you run a client-side tool, if that information is not on that page, you cannot use it. But SiteSpect would allow me to pull that information in and display
exactly.
that. Okay.
And great example, by the way. I know of one of our customers worldwide that did an experiment where they actually created, in this case, not the experiment itself might not be that interesting, but the kind of metrics and goals that they set for that experiment were very interesting, because they were looking at the actual nutritional information of products. So if you do an add to cart, and you add a product with a certain value, of course. But what they were also calculating is how many fat did I add to the cart, how many sugar, how many salt, how many carbohydrates. And in that way, to see if they can somehow influence the users selecting more healthy products. And that information was present on the responses when they did an add to cart. So, and SiteSpect had no trouble at all figuring that information out.
Nice. Yeah, cool examples. But back to what browsers are doing. Can you tell us a bit about the developments? What browsers are doing? What we can expect to happen in the following months to a year?
Well, yeah, basically all the storage solutions that we currently have in the browser will somehow be affected at any point in future. So cookies are already affected. Session storage and local storage are already affected, but they will be squeezing down on it even more. So while a certain cookie might now be blocked after 24 hours, that may be even faster. And they're really looking, and that is kind of what I like about how they approach it. They are looking at the context of a user's session. So if the user just typed in an address, go to a website, that ITP mechanism might respond a little different than if they clicked through from a search algorithm or from a different website with all kinds of identifying parameters in the URL, for example. So they're trying to tailor it to what is actually useful at that point for the user.
Okay.
So that's what's happening. But I guess what we also will see happening is that all the tricks that are in the book about trying to circumvent these solutions, like let's do CNAME tracking so we become a first party, or let's do redirection, which can get rid of some parameters. All of that is detectable and at some point will be blocked or changed somehow. So I guess what we should be looking at some point is what mechanisms do we still have at some point that are still useful and will never go away. And I believe that one of the mechanisms that we will never see disappear is authentication, because we can't live without websites where we can't log in. So we need to have our bank, or we need to have our YouTube account or Facebook, or we need to somehow log in. And a login basically is the best identifier of a user ever.
Do you think that a lot of the websites will move to that they will just start instead of the first page show a cookie notification, show everyone a login page? Otherwise, you cannot visit the page.
Well, yeah, otherwise you cannot visit the page might be a pretty bold statement. But at some point, I do think that every website that tries to make money online needs to think about how they can persuade the user to log in. What kind of added values can they create by having the user log in? Could be as simple as being able to store certain things you've looked at, or to personalize the website to your liking with different color styles. Could be really simple things. Could also be more advanced things where if you log in, you get maybe there's some incentive. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point we see websites basically giving some kind of kickback fee to users if they log in.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, and I mean there are a lot of ways of doing that, but from the merchant perspective, if you cannot track them, they become less and less valuable.
Exactly.
So you can give them a kickback fee for logging in. Yeah.
Yeah, so based on your data, you can calculate what a user is valued, or what value is that user to you. So if you're willing to give a little bit of that to the user itself, it might be very interesting to start visiting certain websites where I normally wouldn't go.
Yeah, exactly. And what are the differences that you see between the different browsers and different companies involved in this, in ITP, ETP?
Well, I think the pace in which they do things is the main differentiator here. So while the browsers that are not necessarily affiliated somehow to a company that tries to make money on advertising and third-party tracking,
Google,
exactly, will be in the forefront of what the changes are. Especially, you mentioned Brave already as the either the worst offender or the best performer. And again, that depends on your perspective. They don't have a business model that relies on that and being part of that ecosystem in general. They do have, of course, Brave has its own business model where you can, there's somehow a kind of economy system going on where you can pay with points to certain advertisers. And so they try to come up with alternatives. But in general, of course, if you make money on the internet with advertising and you also own a browser, and you probably won't be the first one to actually close everything down and make advertising impossible.
Yeah, but I think even those front runners like Brave or what Safari is trying to do, they're held back because people do expect browsers to function in a certain way. And if you visit websites through those restrictive browsers, a lot of things might break. I mean, a lot of websites already I see mentioning that please use Chrome to use even the tool we're using right now to record this. They say, oh, please use Chrome because then we can make sure that everything just works. And it starts breaking down when you go to Firefox or Safari or Brave. Then things might not work as expected, and that's really annoying, right? If you then as a user, if those websites, if a lot of, like the majority of websites don't work properly in those browsers like Brave, as a user, you don't you're constantly switching back and forth between browsers. That's not a great experience either.
No, it definitely is not. And I guess we need to make a distinction there between the things that don't work because certain technologies are not available in a browser, and that especially with the tool we're now using, which was your example. There are certain things that, for example, in Safari would not work because they're not supported in Safari. But that has nothing to do with the fact that the different tracking mechanisms are apply here. Yes, there are many websites that either don't work well because a lot of tracking is disabled. But I think that's also on the publishers to find ways around that, to make your website still work and do not rely on those technologies too much. Why would a certain video not play because you have not accepted cookies? I don't know. The only valid reason for that is we need that cookie because we want to identify you so we can track your information. But
yeah, exactly. But then if there's a value in that for that advertiser, they might say, okay, it might not be a long-term solution, but right now,
correct, yeah,
right now it's still adding value. So as long as I can hold on to this, I'm going to try it.
No, absolutely. That's exactly what you see happening. It's if there's any chance of losing money, then they will grasp it and try to do it. But I think a healthy strategy for those companies should also be looking at the long term. How can we still provide our advertising or our exposure to customers without needing too much information of them? So the weight will shift from trying to personalize it as much as we can, probably to more context specific. Like you're looking at it into a certain context. So this is probably what you want to look at instead of we know what you did last summer and now this is what you're going to look at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but still, if you this dilemma, this is slowing down this move. I mean, it's inevitable that we move there, but it's being slowed down because of this. But do you then think? So, for example, if you're a merchant selling stuff online, and for some reason, over 95% of your users is using Chrome anyway, do you need to be worried, or can you just relax for the coming year, 2 years, because nothing's going to happen anyway?
I don't know what time frame we can attach to that, but I think you should worry anyway, because it's not being said that they will still be using Chrome in 2 years. Anything can change. Yep. At some point, everybody thought Netscape is the best browser. Let's use Netscape. And we all know what happened there. I think a lot of the online population nowadays will probably respond with, what is Netscape? Same thing happens with Internet Explorer. We've seen similar things for Opera. We see people shifting back and forth. The user experience that a browser can give their users, combined with how workable the internet is. So if indeed a Chrome browser is the best solution at that moment, then yes, definitely you might be safe for a while, but don't take it for granted.
So what can users, besides switching to SiteSpect, of course, what can people do to prepare for this? What are the steps they need to take? And especially, of course, the CRO specialist listening to this, that might be getting a bit worried. How do I get a grasp of how big this issue is for me?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't need to think they need to worry about their job, but basically this is creating all kind of new work for CROs. So that's kind of good. But I think the best start would be to make an assessment of your current data. What do we see? Are we somehow affected by the effects that we see in certain browsers? And we know that there's Firefox and Safari. So you might want to look at a report over time if that data is somehow losing quality. There's plenty of tools out there that also allow you to make some kind of a predictive calculation on, okay, this could be the effect if 70% of your traffic, for example, is coming from a mobile Safari. So that is the first thing I think you need to look at. Then put that in perspective with the overall picture of your data. It might not be a problem at all if you see some data shifting. Especially in A/B tests, you could always say that any discrepancy in your data should be equal between A and B. So that's pretty safe. Of course, there's a lot of more nuance there, where some experiments will be affected by those discrepancies and some won't. But for the long term, I think you should be looking at how can we create additional value for customers without relying too much on their specific data. So how can we look at the whole package and not focus too much on an individual and how an individual would behave. Of course, they're still important, but if we can persuade them to, on a website, sign up for an account, or if we can ask them to allow the cookies and properly explain why we need those cookies and what would be in it for them, then I guess that's more a user-centric approach. Look from it from the user's perspective, but do not basically assume that you will get the data that you would like to have.
Yeah, and then for example, for personalization, you could move to instead of saying, okay, you visited or purchased this product or visited this category, you say, okay, I don't know who you are, but I know from people that visited this this category, they also like this product.
Exactly.
Or bought this, or were interested in that more, so we can show you that instead of making it one-on-one.
Yeah, and if you
can relate it to
actually build on that skill set to be able to do that and present it in such a way that for a user it's attractive, instead of them seeing cute kittens on the internet while we're actually looking for something else. But if we can somehow match that interest without the reliance on all that data for that individual user, then I guess you have a benefit over other competitors that are still grasping onto the old methods.
Yeah. So by the way, is personalization something I can also do with SiteSpect?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So we do still rely on cookies for it, of course, but since our cookies are somewhat safe, but yes, we can do either personalization on a more persona perspective, where we try to identify certain groups, but we could also create an individual experience. But that's a lot harder to analyze, of course, because if we have 10,000 users a day with all individual experiences, still hard to explain what is actually happening and why that is happening.
Yeah, it becomes a black box and then you don't know.
Exactly.
Aaron, thank you so much. Our time is up. Thanks for sharing us what SiteSpect can do to help us navigate these difficult times.
Difficult times, yeah.
Things are changing, but that's a given for CRO specialists, right? So we should all feel very at ease in this situation.
Yeah, and exactly. And basically never assume that you nailed it. You're always one step behind, and you always need to make the extra step to get on par again. And then at that moment, you're already behind again.
Yeah.
So just keep working on it. And as long as you try and think logical, it will be fine.
Yeah, but hopefully you're ahead of your competitor. So that should be the driver.
Exactly. You don't need to be the fastest. You definitely don't want to be the slowest.
Yeah, exactly. Erwin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And this concludes Season 3, Episode 6 of the Zero Cafe podcast with Erwin Kerk. Make sure to check out the show notes on the Zero Cafe website for links to some additional information on today's topic. In the next episode, I'll be talking to Tawab Jabbar about digital growth marketing in Nigeria and working remote as a growth marketeer. Talk to you then, and always be optimizing.